2:00 a.m. Rain poured down on the city like a deluge. The nighttime storm dragged on, tearing the sky apart with thin white streaks of lightning that flashed and vanished amid the heavy curtain of rain. At the foot of the Apex building, what locals still coldly called the Tower of Law, the yellow lights from police cars reflected off the wet pavement, shimmering like shards of broken glass. The ambulance siren had gone silent, leaving only the sound of rain slamming against concrete and the wind howling through the gaps in the high-rise windows, composing a chilling, mournful symphony for a sleepless night. The Tower of Law loomed in the heart of the financial district, a solid block of black steel and glass, cold and imposing over 30 stories tall, jutting up like a gigantic blade piercing the sky. The sparse-lit windows stared down like dead eyes, silently watching the chaos below. In the rear corridor area, where no one usually passed, a white tarp covered the body of a woman who had just fallen from the 20th floor. Blood spread red under the lights mixing with rainwater, pooling into a bizarre shape like a wilting flower. Detective Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the yellow tape, his dark trench coat soaked, shoulders drenched. Rain poured from the brim of his hat, streaming down his stony face. Under the flashing lights, his eyes glinted with something unusual, not just fatigue or professionalism, but that instinct that had pulled him out of dead ends many times before. The feeling that something was wrong. Beside him was his partner, the young assistant inspector, still not used to the spine-chilling silence of scenes like this. He stood motionless, staring down at the body with eyes mixed with confusion and awe. On the wet cement, drops of blood merged with rainwater, flowing away as if no one had ever died here. But for Marcus, every detail, no matter how small, was the language of truth. The body belonged to Dr. Elena Vargas, a renowned forensic researcher who had worked for the National Institute of Justice. Her face was pale, long black hair plastered to her neck and shoulders, strands blending into the rainwater like a fragile web binding her. Her left arm was broken and folded, while her right hand remained clenched in a cramped position, as if she had tried to grasp something before falling. Marcus crouched down, his black-gloved fingers lightly brushing the puddle around the body. His eyes stopped at the heel of her shoe. One shoe had a broken heel, the strap torn. He looked up, glancing high toward the building, the dark glass windows, rain lashing over the iron railings, and the fire escape railing running along the side. The only path that could lead to open air. He pictured it, a woman in an evening gown stepping out onto the 20th floor balcony in the rainy night, then falling. But no witnesses, no clear signs of a struggle. The rain lashed harder. Marcus tilted his head slightly to avoid it. He moved toward the fire escape area, where the technical team's flashlights swept across each level's railing. Rainwater streaks fell along the sloped metal, dripping steadily like the cold tick of time. On the 20th floor, a small detail made Marcus pause. Under the yellow light, something metallic glinted like a fallen star. It was a piece of necklace, a small fragment of a gold chain studded with diamonds, caught in the gap of the steel handrail. The tiny stone sparkled, reflecting the flashlight beam, its shimmer in complete contrast to the grim surroundings. Marcus realized it couldn't have fallen there naturally. It had been pulled, yanked, or snagged, clear evidence of a struggle. The night wind howled through the corridor. The rain showed no sign of stopping. Under a flash of lightning, the apex looked like a tower from an ancient ritual, where justice, power, and crime intertwined in opaque layers. Marcus sensed something deeper stirring beneath the surface of this case. Dr. Elena Vargas was no ordinary person. She had been involved in examining major cases, overturning manipulated verdicts. Rumors said she was about to release a bombshell report on the city's judicial system, where Judge Damian Caney was the most powerful figure, and like a chilling coincidence, that name appeared just hours after the body was discovered. Around 3 a.m., a black luxury car pulled up to the building's entrance. The door opened, and Damian Caney stepped out. Tall, long coat, face calm to the point of indifference. He walked through the rain without hurry. His cold gray eyes looked straight at the covered body. No one heard him say anything, only saw that gaze sweep by like a blade, slicing through the thick silence of the night. When the investigation team asked about his presence in the city at the time of the incident, he provided only a brief statement, precise, rigid words that revealed no emotion. He insisted he had left the city the previous afternoon for a conference in Washington. His tone was smooth as a pre-recorded script, and no one could prove otherwise. Marcus watched from afar, his eyes never leaving the man. Under the dim neon lights, Damien's face looked like a wax mask. No wrinkles, no flicker of expression. The wind lifted the hem of his coat lightly, rain whipping his shoulders. But he stood still, as if examining a work of art rather than a corpse. A bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating the entire courtyard. In that moment, Marcus felt the whole space freeze. From the pool of blood to the faces around, everything became motionless, only the deafening roar of the rain. The Tower of Law loomed behind Damien, as if protecting him. The rain still showed no sign of stopping. Marcus crouched again, his eyes fixing on Elena's clenched hand. Between her fingers something faintly glimmered, a thin thread almost invisible if not noticed. He held it up to the light, a black fabric thread very similar to the wool from a man's glove. 20th floor. Diamond necklace fragment, black fabric thread, the name Damien Caney. Everything pieced together into a far more terrifying hypothesis than a suicide on a rainy night. Marcus stood up straight, looking up at the storm-shrouded sky. The black clouds swirled around the top of the Tower of Law. Somewhere inside that steel block, traces might still remain that the rain hadn't washed away. Traces of a truth no one wanted to touch. A lightning bolt tore across the sky, splitting the building's glass face in cold silver light. Marcus watched silently. He knew that when dawn came, the press would call this the tragic fall of a famous female doctor. But he understood it wasn't that simple. What happened tonight, in the darkness amid rain and steel, was just the beginning of a deeper chain of mysteries, where law and crime blurred like shadows in the night. The rain kept falling. At the foot of the Tower of Law, the white tarp gradually darkened in the rainwater mixed with blood, and Marcus Cole, the detective of unsolved cases, still stood there, eyes fixed on the tower's peak lost in black clouds, where lightning had just revealed the light of crime. A fall, a necklace fragment, a powerful judge, and a secret waiting to be unearthed. The story begins here, at 2 a.m., in the relentless rain at the foot of the Tower of Law. 10 a.m., the next day. The city remained shrouded in damp cold clouds after the previous night's rain. The leaden sky muffled the sunlight, as if the sun itself feared illuminating the site of a mysterious death. In Detective Marcus Cole's office, the thick smell of coffee mingled with old paperwork and cigarette smoke. On the desk, the case file lay open. Crime scene photos scattered across the dark wood. Elena Vargas's body, the bloodied necklace fragment, the black thread thin as a hair, all like puzzle pieces that didn't yet fit, sketching the silhouette of a calm liar in the world of law. Marcus sat silently behind the desk, eyes following the weak light filtering through the blinds. Inside the office, the clock's ticking was clear like the slow heartbeat of an ancient creature. The space was filled with the quiet of mornings after a storm, not truly peaceful, but hiding another wave forming. In the open file before him was a copy of Judge Damien Cain's statement, recorded at dawn at the police station. The lines were even, clean, neat to the point of coldness. He said he had left the city the previous afternoon for a legal conference in Washington, with plane tickets, an invitation letter, even hotel photos sent by his personal assistant. Perfect evidence, if not too perfect. Marcus read and reread each line, his eyes stopping at the departure time. 5:45. But Elena Vargas died at 2 a.m. If he had truly left the city, he couldn't have been at the scene. Yet instinct told Marcus the man never left, at least not that night. At exactly 10:15, new information arrived from the department's digital forensics team. An email with data from the Apex's security camera system, the building where Elena lived. The frames were blurry, lit by hallway lights, but clear enough to see a tall man in a long coat entering the private elevator in Lobby B at 23:06, 3 hours before Elena's death. No mistake, it was Damian Kane. The blue screen light reflected on Marcus's face, highlighting eyes narrowing. In the next frame, Kane stood alone in the elevator, yellow light illuminating his carved, cold face. No expression, no fear, just a man going where he knew he needed to go. And when the elevator opened at floor 42, Elena Vargas's penthouse, the hallway camera was accidentally disabled for over an hour. A terrifying data gap. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his thoughtful gaze falling into empty space. He hadn't just lied. He had prepared to lie. A man like Kane, senior judge, overseer of many major trials, knew exactly how to hide traces. But no one could erase everything. Not when rain still fell on crime not yet dry. That afternoon, Marcus was at the penthouse on floor 42. Large glass doors opened to a view of the entire city, an endless sea of concrete sunk in thick fog. Dim light reflected through the glass, scattering gray metallic sheen on the polished floor. The air in the room smelled of disinfectant, the kind trying to mask something that had happened, like a killer wiping away traces but leaving the scent of fear. The apartment was perfectly beautiful. Italian furniture, oil paintings, crystal chandelier, everything arranged precisely to the centimeter. But that perfection made the place soulless, like a luxurious stage where emotion had been replaced by calculation. In the spacious living room, only a few small details broke the balance. An overturned chair with bent legs, a shattered wine glass, dark red streaks arcing across the white carpet, though someone had tried to clean it, but the stain remained, and on the table's edge, a long scratch on the wood, as if something heavy had slammed into it during a struggle. Marcus moved slowly, eyes scanning every detail like reading a wordless diary. On the table, an opened bottle of Bordeaux, half remaining dark red. 2 glasses, one with faint lipstick, the other without. The one without had a thin scratch, like teeth marks on the glass. He leaned slightly, looking through the wide glass. The rain had stopped, but water streaks still clung in long lines, on the glass curving to reflect the city below, where Elena had fallen. The space now felt like a glass tomb, where everything stood still as if waiting for someone to recount what had been buried. Marcus knew Elena Vargas wasn't the type to casually invite someone to her private apartment, especially not Kane, a former colleague but also an adversary in many legal debates. But the camera confirmed he was here, and the physical traces said the same. No gunshot, no knife, just a struggle. Enough to make a woman lose balance on a wet railing. A preliminary report arrived while Marcus was still gazing down at the city. Digital data from Elena's phone showed the last call at 23:48, lasting less than a minute, from an unsaved contact. At the same time, Bluetooth scan logged a smartwatch with an ID matching Kane's connecting within the apartment's range. The details formed a picture Marcus didn't want to believe. The holder of justice's scale was the one standing in crime's shadow. As the forensics team left, afternoon light pierced through the massive glass, casting on tiny dust particles floating like ash. Marcus stood in the empty room, the chair still overturned, the glass still shattered, and in his mind echoed silences. The silence of cases where the killer didn't need to flee, hiding in the shell of power. Marcus's mind returned to last night's image. Damian Kane's face in the rain, eyes unflinching at the corpse. No pity, no anger, no fear. Just suspicious emptiness, as if the death was expected. Such a man wasn't merely hiding. He was controlling. Outside the window, a black crow landed on the railing, wings heavy with water cawing hoarsely. Marcus watched, his eyes cold as steel. In the room bathed in pale light, his reflection and the apex tower overlapped on the glass. Two shadows merging, one seeking justice, one creating it with blood. One final raindrop fell from the glass roof, rolled down the window pane, and vanished. To Marcus, it was the sign that the first curtain had been lifted. What remained now was only time, and the patience of a detective who knew that the best liar is the one who believes his own lie. The next morning, the press exploded with headlines. Judge Caney cooperates in investigation of former colleague's tragic death. His image was everywhere. Stern face, measured smile, moderate voice. No one knew that just hours earlier, in that 42nd floor penthouse, the marks of a struggle were still imprinted on the white carpet. In the office bathed in golden afternoon light, Marcus stared at the security camera footage. Caney turned just as the elevator doors were closing, his eyes looking straight into the lens. A fleeting moment, but enough to make Marcus feel something, as if Caney knew he was being watched. The frame froze there. A powerful judge, a dead woman, a detective staring into the abyss between justice and crime. And right in the middle of that gap, the truth, still silently waiting to be exposed. The city sank into fog. The apex towered. In the late afternoon light, its glass panels reflecting orange gold like thousands of cold eyes watching. In one of those windows, Marcus Cole still sat before the screen, staring intently at the blurry frame of the man named Damian Kane, and knowing that the real hunt had only just begun. That afternoon, the rain returned like an uninvited witness. Drops fell steadily on the frosted windows of the police records room, tapping a cold rhythm against the glass. Inside, harsh fluorescent light poured over towering shelves packed with hundreds of thick files, stacked like secrets not yet allowed to be buried. The air was thick with the smell of damp paper, printer ink, and rusted metal. Everything here was heavy, silent, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning, like the tired breath of an old machine that had witnessed too much evil. Marcus Cole stood in the long aisle, his dark wool coat still speckled with rain. In his hand was a file labeled Elena Vargas, Domestic Violence Report, Case HS231B. The cover was worn at the edges, a few pages inside stained with old coffee marks. In the top corner, handwritten in blue ink, urgent report. 911 call, April, 6 months prior to incident. He sat at the cold metal table in the center of the room and opened the file. Inside were transcribed statements, police reports, and a scratched silver CD containing the 911 recording. Note beneath the disc, duration, 02 minutes 37 seconds. Source, emergency call from penthouse, floor 42, the apex. Marcus silently inserted the disc into the player in the adjacent listening room, a small, soundproof space with thick walls, only dim yellow light, and the smell of scorched electronics. The disc spun slowly, a faint hiss before a woman's voice emerged, shaking, broken, as if every breath was a fight to survive. Elena Vargas's voice. She spoke fast, choking, the sound distorted by terror. There was loud wind, something crashing to the floor, hurried footsteps behind her. Cutting through the panic was a low, gravelly male voice. Only a few short words, cold even. No need to shout, but enough to make the air in the listening room freeze. No words were needed to recognize Damian Kane. That voice had the cadence of a man who gave orders in courtrooms, now echoing in an act of violence. On the tape, Elena begged to leave the apartment. Sobs were drowned out by the sound of something being thrown. A sharp crack, maybe glass, maybe something else. Then the call ended abruptly in chaos. Marcus sat motionless, the yellow light casting sharp shadows across his face. In the silence, his eyes fixed on the white wall as if seeing through time. To the moment Elena tried to call for help, but the justice system she believed in chose silence. The report noted, no arrest warrant issued, no clear physical evidence. Accused, Judge Damian Caney, denied everything. Case temporarily closed. A short line, but heavy as a death sentence for the innocent. Marcus carefully moved to the next section. Body cam footage. Patrol Unit, 14B, April. He played the video. The screen showed shaky footage in the Apex hallway. Blurry image, flashing light from the camera struggling in low light. 2 officers entered the apartment, radio chatter mixing with heavy breathing. Before them stood Caney, white dress shirt misbuttoned, holding a full glass of red wine. Even without sound, Marcus could feel the man's arrogance. He didn't hide, didn't flinch, even stepped closer to the lens, face calm as if he were in a boardroom, not a crime scene. In a few frames, Elena appeared behind him, face swollen, lip bleeding, but eyes empty. She didn't cry, just stood as if she knew words were useless. The video ended with the officers leaving without filing a report. Before the camera shut off, one turned back for a fleeting glance at Elena, a look that dropped, then vanished into the hallway darkness. Marcus paused the video. The room fell so quiet he could hear rain pounding the tin roof outside. The air felt sucked dry of oxygen. He reopened Damian Cain's personal file. Harvard Law Doctorate. Former federal prosecutor. Current district judge. Criminal record clean. Only a few anonymous complaints about authoritarian behavior. One lawsuit quietly dismissed for lack of evidence. But beneath the polished surface, every timeline matched terrifyingly with events around Elena Vargas. 6 months ago, the 911 call. 3 months later, she submitted resignation from the Research Institute. 1 month ago, an invitation for a private reconciliation meeting from Caney. And now, death from floor 42. The threads were reconnecting, not chronologically but along an orbit of power and fear. Marcus wrote on the whiteboard. One call, threatened, audio evidence, body cam, controlling behavior, aggressive conduct, apex. Camera, false alibi, 3 short lines but enough to sketch the portrait of a man who believed he stood above the law. The yellowish ceiling light poured down on the open files. Black and white photos, Elena with a gentle smile, slightly sad eyes, lay atop crime scene images of her body in the rain. Between those 2 images was an unmeasurable distance, a void only true justice could fill. Marcus leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling. In his mind were no longer images of Caney, but of the women he hadn't saved in past cases. Emergency calls, folded reports, traces erased by courts. Anger crept in, not explosive but smoldering, like a circuit about to short. He understood. This case was no longer a standard investigation. It was a confrontation between 2 sides of the same system, one who believed in the law and one who used it to kill without touching a knife. The records room door closed, leaving Marcus alone in the dim light. He looked at the recording disc, the body cam drive, the forgotten evidence. Each small object seemed to hold Elena's final breath, waiting to speak. Outside, the rain fell harder. Distant thunder rumbled through the window frame. A flash of lightning lit up the whiteboard where Marcus had written in black marker, "No one stands above justice." And in that moment, Detective Marcus Cole knew that if the system could not judge Damian Cain, he would. 2 days after the incident. The city remained wrapped in damp chill, as if that night's rain still refused to leave the minds of everyone who knew of Elena Vargas's death. On the boulevard toward downtown, the glass tower of Merritt and Coalfield law firm glowed in the gloomy morning. Inside, the air was so heavy you could hear the heartbeat of suppressed rage. 8th floor conference room, where the Vargas family waited for their lawyer to finalize proceedings. Lucia Vargas, the silver-haired mother with eyes dulled by sleeplessness, clutched a photo of her daughter. A smart, beautiful face that once shone in the light of courtrooms where Elena had appeared as defense counsel. Now that face existed only in a cold photograph. Beside her sat Gabriel Vargas, the brother, rigid but hands trembling slightly each time he signed a document. He tried to stay calm, but inside he boiled knowing Damian Kane, Elena's former partner, had filed an emergency injunction to block the family from receiving her body for burial. The news hit like a punch to the heart. A man suspected of causing her death now invoked legal representative rights to control even how she would rest. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Marcus Cole sat silently in his old car parked outside family court. Wind blew through peeling paint, carrying the smell of dust and rust. He still couldn't shake the image of Elena's face in the autopsy file. Faint bruises under the chin, injuries inconsistent with a free fall. The necklace fragment caught. On the 20th floor railing still had no official explanation. But Cole knew deep down the truth, cold and hard to swallow as a bullet in the chest. He looked at the courthouse, where law sometimes no longer represented justice. Where Caney, a judge with reputation, master of every legal loophole, was preparing to use the very laws Elena once believed in to bury her soul once more. Inside, the temporary courtroom, Damian Kane appeared exactly as Cole had imagined. Black suit perfectly tailored, silver tie knotted precisely, face expressionless, eyes like two shards of cold glass. Not a trace of grief or remorse, only calculation. Sharp, controlled, ruthless. He stood beside his legal team, 3 men in identical gray suits lined up like a barricade of power. The courtroom became a silent battlefield. No shouting, only the even voices of lawyers, numbers, clauses, and legal grounds thrown back and forth like sharp knives. Caney cited statutes on spousal authority over final arrangements, claiming that as Elena's husband, he had full rights over burial, and that the Vargas family was acting under emotion, obstructing the investigation. On the opposing side, the Vargas family lawyer countered with evidence that Elena and Caney's relationship had broken down severely over a year ago, along with a temporary restraining order application Elena had filed, but never approved by the court. Arguments rang out, weaving between cold statutes and the choked breaths of a grieving mother. Cole sat in the back, silently observing. In the light reflected off the wooden table, he saw the image of 2 opposing worlds. One side power, protected by legal language, the other side raw, vulnerable pain. When the arguments ended, the presiding judge announced a recess to review the validity of the marriage and the unconfirmed will. Those words plunged the room into absolute silence. At that exact moment, the Vargas family lawyer opened his briefcase and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Pale yellow, corners slightly worn, bearing Elena Vargas's signature. On the header, Living Testament Confidential, a living will, drafted just weeks before her death. In that document, Elena declared that in the event of accident or death by unclear causes, all authority over final arrangements and personal assets would go to her mother and brother, not her ex-husband. The document was notarized and stored at a private law office, something Caney had no knowledge of. The appearance of that document changed the room's atmosphere. For the first time, Caney lost his composure. His lips pressed together, eyes shifting straight to the envelope, as if inside was a blade slicing into the perfect image he had built for so long. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall. Heavy drops hammered the steel railing, mingling with distant car horns. Cole stepped onto the portico, looking up to the upper floor where Caney stood in the glass corridor, light reflecting off the thick panes, turning him into a distorted black silhouette. In that moment, Cole understood this fight was not just about finding a killer. It was about exposing how justice is manipulated in the hands of those who hold power. That evening, Cole returned to his office. The pale golden desk lamp cast light over unfinished files, forensic photos, and psychological reports. He looked at Elena's picture once more. That face was no longer just a victim. It was a symbol for those the system had abandoned. Her will, though only a few pages, was the final act of defiance from a woman who knew the evil she faced. Outside, the rain kept falling. The city seemed to be washing away the remnants of an unfinished case. But to Cole, every raindrop carried a reminder that sometimes justice is not found in courtrooms, but in the will of the dead. 1 week after the incident, the city remained shrouded in thick, damp fog like the lingering ash of a smoldering fire. Dim light pierced the glass windows of the apex, falling onto the marble floor of the 42nd floor, where Elena Vargas's penthouse remained sealed with yellow police tape. The hallway air felt frozen in time from the night of the tragedy. Detective Marcus Cole stood before the door, holding a special sealed key. Since the incident, he had returned to the building 3 times, but this time was different. He wasn't looking for a weapon or physical traces. He was searching for hidden legal evidence. The forensic team with him consisted of 2 people carrying fingerprint scanners, UV lights, and professional cameras. The penthouse opened in absolute silence. The air inside was icy, artificially clean, as if someone had tried to erase the past. Light from the windows reflected off glass surfaces, revealing faint streaks, hasty wipes, imperfect. Elena's desk sat against the west wall, where she used to spend hours reading files and drafting legal clauses. On the desk, papers had been cleared, leaving only a few thick, dusty books, a vase of dried flowers, and a silver fountain pen out of ink. Cole walked around the room, his flashlight sweeping slowly over every object. Picture frames, notebooks, files arranged too neatly. That very neatness unsettled him. According to colleagues, Elena was meticulous but natural, never organizing things like a mechanical library. Everything here seemed staged, a set cleaned after the final act. When the flashlight passed over the ebony bookshelf, a small object made him pause. A thick book, dark leather cover, embossed title, Federal Tax and Code Law, Volume 2. Nothing special except it didn't belong with the civil law books Elena usually used. Cole pulled it out. The leather was stiff, apparently old, and on the edge were faint fingerprints not matching Elena's. He opened the book. Between the tiny printed lines on tax clauses and inheritance rights were handwritten marks in black ink, small circles, diagonal slashes, scattered numbers. No apparent meaning, but deliberately arranged. A legal-style cipher. Only someone who understood the writer's system could decode it. On the last page, Cole found a faint note. The code lies between the lines. EV, a message from Elena. In the pale yellow light, Cole sensed something more than a prank. Those marks weren't just notes, they were a hidden cipher. And the fact that it was written in a book belonging to Damian Caney, found in Elena's room, could not be coincidence. 3 hours later, at the department's Digital Analysis Center, the book lay on Dr. Anya Sharma's desk, the cryptography expert and tech consultant Cole had worked with on high-tech cases. Her office was filled with screens, cables, blue light reflecting off her calm face. Sharma didn't speak much, but her focus was so intense the air around her seemed sucked into her thoughts. Cole stood behind her, watching every move. The scanner captured each page, converting symbols into data strings. On the screen, hundreds of characters and tiny geometries appeared, rearranged by frequency algorithms. A fractal pattern gradually emerged, a logic-based legal cipher, solvable only by understanding the underlying legal structure. Elena had used the very language of law to hide her final secret. Sharma typed a few commands, mapping symbols to referenced clauses. The first line appeared on the screen, Clause 17, Subsection D, Revocation of Spousal Inheritance Rights. Cole felt his blood run cold. That was a rare clause. applied only in cases revoking spousal inheritance due to abuse or emotional violence. The screen continued, other code segments assembled into a complete document. It was a secret living will, written in hidden form within the book, decipherable only by someone who knew Elena's symbol system. In that coded will, Elena Vargas transferred all assets, shares, and trust funds to the International Quantum Research Foundation, an organization she had collaborated with. The final line read clearly, effective upon filing of official divorce, meaning if Elena died after filing for divorce, Caney would get nothing. No honor, no wealth, no power. Cole stared silently at the screen. He understood why Caney was so afraid, and why Elena had to hide this document. A woman who lived in the shadow of power had finally used the law, the very thing Caney believed he controlled, to strip him of everything. The room was quiet, only the low hum of computers and the sound of rain starting outside. Blue light illuminated Cole's face, highlighting a sharp yet somber gaze. In that moment, he no longer saw Elena as a victim, but as an architect of justice who had foreseen everything, even her own death. He looked up at the data board where the final line blinked softly. To those who seek truth, remember, justice is written between the lines. Cole knew Elena had left clues not just for lawyers, but for him, the one who would continue the fight she couldn't finish. Outside, sunset light reflected off the Tower of Law's glass. A stream of orange-red poured over the city, making the building appear to burn in silence. Inside, Cole closed the book slowly and placed it into an evidence bag. The match between truth and power had just moved to a new round, and this time, the dead had played one move ahead. 2 weeks after the incident, the city sky sank into metallic gray on a sunless morning. Skyscrapers loomed like wet steel blocks, reflecting the dim light of a sun swallowed by clouds. On the city's outskirts, the National Forensic Physics Center complex stood isolated amid industrial zones, its massive glass walls mirroring the sky like a distorted mirror. The air here left no room for emotion, only formulas, data, and truth extracted from equations. Detective Marcus Cole entered the main lab, where Professor Leo Chen was preparing a simulation model. Inside, everything was unnaturally still. The only sounds were industrial fans and the steady pulse of sensors. No smell of corpses or reagents, only ozone and technical plastic. On the table, a 3D model of the Tower of Law hovered in midair, a holographic recreation. Light grid lines ran along the simulated glass facade, while a small red dot marked where Elena Vargas fell. From that dot, a thin curved thread extended into space, simulating the body's fall trajectory. Each data update slightly altered the curve, oscillating within a few percentage points of a millimeter, the fluctuation of truth within error margins. Cole stood motionless, light reflecting off his stern face, making his features look carved from stone. He stared at the red dot as if witnessing the exact moment a soul fell free through emptiness. Professor Chen, a middle-aged Asian man with bright eyes and hands that never stopped moving, worked the control panel. He entered parameters 20th floor height. That night's wind speed 12 km/h, northwest direction Elena's body mass, and precise ground impact point measured at the scene. An electronic tone sounded. The hologram replayed the fall in slow motion. The virtual body started at the 20th floor railing, tilted forward, then fell along gravity's natural curve. But upon impact, the model showed the actual contact point, marked in green light, displaced more than 3.6 meters from the expected free-fall trajectory. In the language of physics, 3.6 meters was a confession. The system displayed a force graph. A yellow band represented the push required for that distance. Minimum 200 newtons, equivalent to a full-body adult shove. Not a slip. Not an accident. Not a fall. Behind thick glass, artificial wind blew through the real-scale test structure, a 10-meter metal rig in the wind lab. On it, a sensor-equipped dummy simulated Elena's fall. When Chen activated the system, the dummy was given a light push, landing on the rubber floor. Red indicator, deviation too low. He increased force, adjusted angle, and this time, the dummy landed exactly where the forensic report recorded. The indicator light turned green. On the screen appeared the cold line. External force confirmed. Cole stood motionless. Data was truth. There was no room for assumption. All he felt now was the weight of that truth growing heavier, pressing on his chest like tons of metal. Professor Chen said nothing, only projected additional graphs. Parabolic curves appeared one after another, each a hypothesis eliminated, until only one remained, a fall trajectory with external influence. Elena's body had not fallen. It had been pushed. A push in the rainy night, from the 20th floor of the Tower of Law, where there were no witnesses, no cameras, only wind and cold lights shining on the railing. Cole remembered the diamond necklace fragment caught on the handrail he had found that first night. Now everything began to fit together like steel puzzle pieces. The necklace snagged during a struggle, fingerprints blurred by rain, and the off-axis fall. No longer speculation. It was the result of deliberate action. He stepped closer to the model. The blue light illuminated his face, making his eyes look like two black voids. In his mind, the image of Elena, the woman who once believed in the law, now a victim of the very thing she had defended, began to replay. Outside, the wind blew hard. The glass panes rattled faintly, echoing the fall. In that silence, Cole understood that the trajectory curve was not just a physics equation, it was the final trace of violence, rewritten in the language of gravity. Professor Chen printed the final report. White paper, black letters, formulas, and parallel graphs, all combined into undeniable evidence. In the conclusion, the bold, cold line stood out like a death sentence. Given the physical conditions at the scene, natural fall is ruled out. To achieve the recorded trajectory, a minimum applied force of 200 N is required, equivalent to an intentional push. Conclusion: victim was pushed from the railing. Cole signed the acknowledgement, his handwriting firm but his hand trembling slightly. From that moment, the Elena Vargas case was officially reclassified, from suspicious to first-degree murder. He knew this decision would trigger a chain reaction. Once the system registry updated, the name Damien Kane, the man once shielded by power and reputation, would become the prime suspect. And for him, nothing was more terrifying than non-negotiable truth. On the hologram screen, the fall model kept looping, as if Elena were still falling forever in space, in the unfinished cycle of justice. Cole turned off the lights, letting the room sink into the cold blue darkness of data. Outside the glass, the first seasonal rain began again. Drops struck the panes, sliding down like diluted blood in artificial light. In the sound of rain, Cole heard a faint echo, not the fall of a body, but the fall of a mask of power, cracking piece by piece, ready to reveal the real face beneath, and this time, science had spoken for the dead. 3 weeks after the incident, the city had stopped talking about that stormy night, but its aftermath still enveloped everything. The Apex building, once a symbol of lawyers and power, had become a symbol of a crack in public trust. The media no longer called it the Tower of Law, but the Tower of the Fallen. Windows that once reflected morning sunlight were now covered with tarps and barriers, as if the building itself was serving a silent sentence for the crimes it witnessed. In the Central District Police Headquarters office, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, paperwork, and flickering computer screens. Cole sat in the corner, fluorescent light from above casting tired shadows across his brow. On his screen, hundreds of articles piled up like crashing waves. Judge Damien Kane, hero or killer. Victim Elena Vargas, a forgotten genius amid power's secrets. What is the police department trying to hide? The black letters seemed to mock. Kane, with his calm face and polished smile, still appeared before cameras as the perfect icon of the legal elite. He had hired an entire army of high-powered attorneys, names that once made prosecutors back down in silence. Every day, Men in black suits flowed in and out of his office like an elite force. Every press conference, every statement, every tweet was calculated, edited, and released with intent. Outside, the crowd split in two. One side raised protest signs, "Justice for Elena, no one stands above the law." The other, Kaney's loyalists, believed in his talent and reputation, claiming he was being framed in a political conspiracy. They shouted slogans, flooding even the courthouse steps where one day, the trial would take place. Cole felt exhaustion not just from lack of sleep, but from the invisible weight of public opinion swirling around the case. He knew the truth, physical evidence, the recording, the fall trajectory, the coded will, all pointed to Kaney. But in a world where money and law intertwined, truth was never the deciding factor. From his office, Cole looked through the frosted glass at dozens of reporters camped in the lobby. Long lenses like gun barrels pointed straight up to the second floor where he sat. Each camera flash cut through the darkness of trust like a knife. Cole understood the case was no longer just an investigation. It had become a battlefield of images, where whoever controlled the narrative controlled justice. His superiors began to waver. They wanted more caution, stronger evidence, avoidance of judicial conflict. To Cole, each piece of advice was another layer of dust covering Elena's body, the dust he had been brushing away for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Kaney appeared on evening news in ash-gray suits, low voice, eyes that knew how to stare into the camera. He neither denied nor confessed. He only spoke of faith in justice, media distortion, and personal pain being exploited. His image spread across social media, and paradoxically, the more his crimes were questioned, the more his reputation was polished. Cole knew he was slowly losing the war of words. He needed a strike, not with a gun, but with truth. That night, as the city quieted after the final broadcasts, he sat before his computer, hand trembling slightly on the mouse. The original 911 recording sat on the screen. He opened it. Elena's voice emerged unclear, mixed with sobs and gasping breaths. In the distant background, another voice, cold, low, steady as a clock, Kaney. He didn't shout, didn't strike, just spoke a few short words, each carrying absolute authority, as if he weren't speaking to the woman in front of him but to the entire world. Cole listened to that segment repeatedly, each time feeling someone tightening a grip around his throat. He knew this full recording would never be allowed public. It would be taken down, sued, blocked. But if just a portion carefully selected, released the right way, it could be enough to ignite public outrage. He edited the audio file, removing identifying parts, keeping only Elena's pleas and the cold echo behind them. A wall of rain, a few broken sounds, and her voice saying, "Please don't." Before silence, a clip under 30 seconds, but powerful enough to make the entire city hold its breath. The next morning, the clip appeared on an independent journalist's site, someone Cole had worked with on past cases. The headline was simple, no sensationalism, 911 recording, the silence that speaks for everything. The spread was almost instantaneous. Television news, social media forums, personal posts all shared the audio. Some listened and cried, some raged, some just fell silent, unsure whom to believe anymore. But all agreed on one thing, something was being hidden. Within 24 hours, Elena-related hashtags flooded everywhere. Women's organizations, domestic violence advocacy groups, law students, all spoke out together. Media pressure reversed. For the first time since that fateful rainy night, the public no longer asked, "What did Elena do wrong?" but "Why is Kaney still free?" Cole sat quietly in his office, blue screen light reflecting on his face. Outside the window, the city remained hazy in early fog. He knew he had crossed the line between investigation and media manipulation. But in this world, perhaps only those who could make others see the truth, even through distortion, had a chance at justice. Across town, Kaney stepped out of his building followed by dozens of cameras. The smile on his lips remained unchanged, but his eyes were different. The eyes of a man who knew the tide was rising. And this time, It was no longer within his control. 1 month after the incident, police headquarters was bathed in the cold white light of a winter morning. No more knife-like rain, only fog and silence. The special interrogation room, a windowless rectangle with pale gray walls, lay deep in the building's basement, where light never seemed to reach. There, every sound was swallowed, every breath grew heavy, and every word, if spoken, carried the weight of truth or collapse. Detective Marcus Cole entered first. He carried no files, no laptop, no physical evidence, only a pen and a blank notebook, a meticulously calculated tactic. Everything else had already been prepared in his mind, where memories of the case were arranged as carefully as shards of sharp glass. Before him, Damian Kane sat upright, hands clasped in front of him. The neon light poured down on the crown of his head, creating a false halo. He looked like a judge awaiting judgment, not the one being interrogated. The ash-gray suit was flawless, collar without a single crease, deep eyes still calm. But in that calm was something else. A thin crack, barely perceptible, like the first hairline fracture in a wall thought unbreakable. Cole sat down, exactly the distance dictated by the instinct of someone who had faced hundreds of similar confrontations. Not close enough to provoke, not far enough to seem intimidated. He looked at Caney, as if seeing through skin, through words, to something deeper, the core of truth. The room was absolutely silent. Only the electronic wall clock ticked softly, cold and steady. Cole began, not with accusations, but with small details, lines pulled from old files, bruises photographed in the first 911 call, medical reports forgotten in drawers. He recounted them out of order, without emotion, as if reconstructing a psychological portrait, layer by layer, detail by detail. In the corner, the recording camera turned slowly, light reflecting off Caney's eyes, making them look like two spinning silver streaks. At first, he maintained his cold confidence. Every breath was controlled. But the longer it went, the more unstable that breathing became. Cole didn't attack with questions. He attacked with silence, the cruelest weapon in any interrogation. The silence stretched until the room felt suffocating. The light seemed to dim, giving way to shadows creeping between the two men. Cole looked at Caney with eyes that held no anger, only a terrifying understanding, the kind that forces a person to face themselves. He spoke of Elena, not by name but by image. A woman who once lived in light, now reduced to a shadow on cold pavement. He spoke of her scraped hands, the spilled glass in the penthouse, the small bloodstain at the foot of the stairs. He recalled, each detail as if each one painted Caney's portrait, not as a judge but as a man who lost control when the world no longer revolved around him. In a brief moment, Caney's facial muscles twitched. A tiny movement, but in that sealed space it rang like breaking glass. Cold spread down his neck, his hands clenched, not from anger, but from fear. Fear of being seen through. Cole remained silent. He knew Caney was fighting himself, between the public image he had built and the real shadow of who he was. And deep in Kane's mind, Elena was still there, like an unhealed scar. In the minutes that followed, Cole moved to details from the old domestic violence files. The times police were called but no one was arrested. Reports edited, statements blurred. He didn't conclude. He simply stated. And each fact was a needle piercing Kane's moral armor. The air grew thick. Sweat wasn't visible on Kane's temples, but his lips dried and each swallow tightened his jaw. He didn't resist. He didn't need to. His silence was the most naked confession. Cole looked at him longer, eyes like a blade cutting through pretense. He didn't need excuses, didn't need a confession. What he needed was the crack. And now it had appeared. Caney, who once made courtrooms bow, who made the system tremble, now sat there, no longer a judge, but a fractured soul. Cole opened the notebook and wrote a single line, not a note, but a marker. Then he looked up. His voice dropped, colder than the air around them. He didn't speak of the case. He didn't speak of Elena. He only mentioned the coded will, a term only a few people even knew existed. In that moment, everything changed. Caney flinched, almost unable to hide it. His eyes widened briefly, then immediately tried to regain composure, but it was too late. A deeper crack had formed. He didn't know what Cole knew, didn't know what Elena had left behind, didn't know where the danger lay. And that not knowing was the deadliest weapon. Cole saw it. He stood, gathered his notebook, and left empty space before Caney. The room suddenly felt colder. The pale white light reflected off the table, creating two distorted, blurred figures, one standing, one sitting, like symbols of opposing entities. Caney sat alone in a room now so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. He tried to look at the table, but in his mind appeared Elena, her gentle smile, eyes that knew what was coming, and a line hidden in an old tax law book, symbols he thought only he understood. For the first time, his certainty wavered. The tower of power he had built with law, reputation, and control was shaking from its foundation. Outside the room, Cole's shadow faded in the long hallway's yellow light. But in Caney's mind, one question echoed like an invisible reverberation. How much does he know? When the steel door closed, Caney suddenly realized it wasn't evidence. It wasn't public opinion, but fear itself that was tightening around his throat day by day. 6 weeks after the incident, afternoon light streamed through the high glass windows of the Apex, painting the interior walls with a web of pale gold. Outside, the city ran as usual, but in sealed offices, a historic decision was being made. In the prosecutor's office, the desk was buried under files. Stacks of documents, crime scene reports, printed fall trajectories, audio files, security photos, and videos formed a dense labyrinth of evidence. The lead prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an unwrinkled face, flipped through each printout. Beside her, Detective Marcus Cole stood still, watching the pieces assemble into a complete whole. The synthesis had taken weeks. Caney's statements, every small lie, had been peeled apart and cross-referenced with security footage. The necklace, fragment caught on the railing, the fall trajectory simulated by Professor Chen, the domestic violence records, and Elena's coded will, all combined into an undeniable picture. Each detail was placed in the context of a premeditated, meticulously calculated crime. The office air was thick with tension. Every breath felt heavy. The rustle of paper sounded like the stressed heartbeat of a case nearing its end. Cole watched the prosecutor sign each warrant, red ink stamping bright white paper. An arrest warrant for Judge Damian Kane, one of the city's most powerful figures. An hour later, the SWAT team moved toward Caney's 42nd floor penthouse. The luxurious apartment retained its dazzling exterior, warm light from crystal chandeliers spilling onto polished wood floors. A small party was underway, carefully staged. Glasses of red wine, meticulously arranged plates, a few guests half fake, half curious. Everything was designed to create the illusion that Caney still controlled everything, that he remained the unshakable center of power. But in the hallway, SWAT stood silent. Black gear gleaming, faces masked, every step calculated to the centimeter. Cole stood outside, watching from the control monitor, eyes fixed on the penthouse. He knew this moment was not just about power, but about final justice. The truth of Elena Vargas, the case Caney once thought he could escape. Inside, Caney still wore a thin smile, raising a glass before a few invited media cameras. He didn't know that from the back rooms, glass doors and locks had been prepared to separate him from his fabricated world. The party's golden light illuminated his cold, refined, yet hateful features. A soft electronic tone sounded. SWAT, on the prosecutor's signal, moved in. No shouting, no collision. Everything unfolded with surreal precision. They secured positions, locked side doors in the living room, ensuring Caney had no escape. Cole watched on the monitor. Caney registered the team's presence in a split second. One moment of distraction. The thin smile froze. Panic flashed in his eyes, but he still tried to maintain calm. Yet in that brief instant, Cole saw the psychological crack he had exploited in the interrogation room. Control fracturing. Fear seeping in. Elena's details beginning to bite through Kane's false armor. SWAT approached the main room where Caney stood amid the party. No guns drawn, no brute force. Just precise, decisive movements cornering him. Caney frowned, eyes darting, realizing every exit was sealed. Cole sensed his pulse racing. Remaining. Wine glasses trembled slightly as the team moved. Chandelier light glinted off arms and faces. A surreal symmetry between luxury and collapse. Power on the outside, helplessness within. A SWAT member stepped forward, placing cuffs on Caney's wrists. The action was swift, exact, wordless. Caney stood still, body slightly shrinking, eyes locking onto Cole through the glass one final time, and gaze both defiant and terrified of exposure. The penthouse fell silent after that moment. The warm golden party light now only reflected off polished wood onto a table with untouched wine glasses and plates. All the luxury remained, but its meaning had completely changed. This was now a crime scene of fallen power, not opulence. As Caney was led away through the long hallway and elevator, every detail felt surreal to Cole. Wall paintings, crystal chandeliers, glass panels, all became silent witnesses to the final fall of a powerful man. No screams, no resistance. Only the image of one who once stood at the top, now led away like a puppet, face cold but eyes vacant. At the prosecutor's office, Cole stood quietly by the window, looking out over the city. Skyscrapers reflected the late afternoon light, red and gold blending like an endless sunset. Inside him, relief came not from joy, but from the sense that justice had begun moving along its proper path. In the silence, he thought of Elena, the woman who wrote the coded will, who didn't live to see the world change, but left traces that ensured her killer couldn't escape. With the arrest warrant issued, every move, every action of Caney's would be monitored. Every shred of power stripped step by step. The city still ran, but the balance had tipped toward justice, and Cole, standing quietly in the pale golden light, knew a new chapter in the Elena Vargas case had opened, where truth and justice were the main characters, and power and lies were mere fading shadows. Outside the building, the evening breeze rustled through trees, scattering golden leaves like a soft melody reminding the case wasn't over, but the decisive step had been taken. 1 year had passed since Elena Vargas fell from the high-rise railing. The city still operated like a slow-moving organism that never stopped. Skyscrapers still cast shadows on crowded streets, but in sealed rooms where the case's final decisions were made, time seemed frozen. The courtroom, vast, high-ceilinged, light from crystal windows spilling onto polished wood floors, was filled with gravity. Public seats were nearly full, not out of curiosity, but in wait for a worthy ending. Cold white light fell on witnesses' faces, tense eyes tracking every movement, every tiny gesture. Judge, prosecutor, defense counsel, and jury all radiated heavy, focused energy. Throughout the trial, the space held a strange symmetry, power and justice colliding, while truth seeped through every piece of evidence, every report, every file Marcus Cole and his team had gathered over 6 grueling weeks. Old details were presented logically, without emotional emphasis, because the facts themselves told the story. Caney's lies, Elena's unnatural fall trajectory, the coded will protecting her assets, and the meticulously unearthed domestic violence records. Each fact was a brick paving the road to truth, and the wall of justice rose before everyone's eyes. Caney sat in his familiar dark suit, but no longer with cold confidence. His face was thinner, eyes ringed with shadows, lips pressed tight. Each time his gaze swept the jury, searching for a gap, a loophole to slip through, he found none. The absolute control he once held was gone, replaced by a void now filled by authority and justice. Elena's family, her mother and brother, sat below, faces still marked by pain, but eyes filled with resolve. They followed every detail, every development, knowing every lie, every attempt to manipulate the law by Caney, was now meaningless before the evidence. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the jury delivered the verdict. Damian Caney was convicted, but justice didn't stop at criminal law. In the parallel civil suit, Elena's family won protection of her assets under the Slayer law, ensuring Caney, the killer, had no inheritance rights. Elena's persistence, through the coded will, became the legal shield protecting what was hers, proof that power cannot override justice. 1 week after the trial, Marcus Cole returned to his office. Small room, light gray walls, window light reflecting off the wooden desk where case files were now neatly stacked. On the desk, a framed photo of Elena Vargas, her gentle smile behind slightly warm glass. Cole sat chin on hand, eyes quietly tracing her face. The office was so silent he could hear paper rustling as window breeze pushed the curtains. Cole thought of the journey, each piece of evidence, each interrogation hour, each moment watching Caney fracture. He realized justice had not been served by the system Caney once manipulated, but by persistence, meticulous observation, and the determination of those willing to face power. He remembered Caney's eyes in the interrogation room, vague fear seeping through proud exterior. Remembered Caney being led from the penthouse, the power he once held now just a shadow. Cole told himself, not in words but in deep understanding, the most controlling people, those who believe they stand at absolute heights, are the most fragile when they lose absolute control. For a few moments, Cole looked out the window at the vast city still running normally, yet every street, every building, every light reflected on high-rise glass bore the case's mark. Elena was gone, but her traces remained, through evidence, through the coded will, through justice served. Cole placed his hand on the photo, fingers gently brushing the glass. A faint smile appeared on his lips, not from victory, but from realizing that long journeys, silent struggles, are sometimes the only way for justice's light to pierce where power seemed invincible. The office sank into silence, only the clock's soft ticks reminding that time moves on, and justice, though quiet, endures. Marcus Cole stood, picked up the files, eyes full of resolve, ready for the next cases. Outside, pale golden afternoon light reflected off skyscraper glass, stretching the city's shadow in the silhouettes of those daring to face truth. The Elena Vargas case closed, but the story of power, justice, and persistence still echoed, silent but undeniable. In Cole's mind rang a realization. Justice never sleeps, and those who dare manipulate it will pay, one way or another. Elena's photo in the glass frame seemed to flicker in the late light, like a reminder. Persistence, fairness, and meticulous evidence will always defeat those who believe themselves untouchable. And Marcus Cole, standing alone in the quiet office, knew that justice, though silent, had finally prevailed.